Hi, I would like to welcome you all for coming today. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to an excellent series with Dr. Ebeling. But first of all, some housekeeping issues. We'd like to thank our sponsors, the most important of which is the Templeton Foundations that have taken us on for the last 3 years now. And without them, we're not sure this would be possible. Compass Point has provided accommodations and we're very grateful. We also have some patrons that we need to mention. Donald Tomlinson, Go Ahead Biscuits, Arizona Drinks, our supporters, J.S. Johnson and Majestic Tours, and our donors, Bahamas First. They all help make this possible. Of course, without Dr. Ebeling offering his expert lectures, it wouldn't be possible. And of course, none of it would be worth doing if we didn't have an audience to come and share it with us. So thank you so much. Enjoy Dr. Ebeling.
Those of you who are here for the first time, thank you for spending a few hours today again. Yesterday I spoke on a number of topics, the moral foundations of a free enterprise system, the nature of market capitalism and the profit and loss system. Today what I wanted to begin our discussions about is understanding the economics of the political process, ethical entrepreneurs or crony capitalists, as Mr. Lowe was just saying. And to begin, what I want to do is just to remind ourselves what the nature of the market economy is. Free market or competitive capitalism refers to an economic system under which the means of production are privately owned by either individuals or corporate entities. The guiding principle of human relationships under free market capitalism is voluntary agreement and mutual consent in all associations, transactions, exchanges, and contractual arrangements. Each individual is free to decide upon and pursue his own ends and interests as he defines them and finds it most advantageous, as long as he respects the equal rights of all other individuals in society to peacefully and freely do the same. Under a system of division of labor, individuals become mutually interdependent, specializing in the production of one or a small handful of particular goods and services, and trading them away in exchange for those goods and services that he desires that others are offering in trade in their own lines of specialized activity. Each individual, in his own self-interest, finds it advantageous to apply his talents and abilities in ways that serve and advance the interests and goals of others as the means to achieving his own chosen ends through the ongoing and continuous relationships of market exchanges. Under such a system of free market capitalism, the role and duties of government are to respect, secure, and protect the rights of each individual citizen to their respective life, liberty, and honestly acquired property. Okay, that is the essence of a market, a truly free market economy. In this instance, the businessman can only earn profits, generate the revenues that he hopes to obtain in market transactions by making better products, newer products, improved products, less expensive products, that he can attract consumers to want to buy, and to be doing all these things in a way better or superior to what his competitive rivals on the supply side of the market are also attempting to do. That is, also capture your consumer business. This means that each individual pursuing his own directed self-interest can only advance his own purposes by at the same time applying his knowledge, skills, and abilities in ways that advance his own goals, but do so by providing goods and services to others that those others want in exchange for the things that he desires to obtain from them. I would argue, and many economists have argued, that this makes the market system a particularly honest and ethical one. It abolishes, it bans, it prohibits the use of force in human relationships. The three golden rules, if you will, that obviously go back a long way. You don't kill, you don't steal, and you don't bear false witness. That is, you don't lie or cheat or defraud. But as long as you follow these simple rules of the game, of not killing, not stealing, and not cheating, then all that you do in the marketplace is based upon honorable respect for others and ethical ways of achieving your own goals and purposes. That is the essence of a truly free market economy, grounded in the right of the individual, each of you, to have a property right in your mind and your body and to freely exercise them in peaceful association with other such sovereign individuals. In the competitive free market economy, the role and task of the entrepreneur, the businessman, the enterpriser, who has the idea, the vision of what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, in what quantities and with what qualities, and hires workers, acquires resources, rents land and purchases machinery and opens a factory. It is his vision, his conception, that guides the production of the society, his creative mind. And his task is to successfully anticipate the types and patterns of future consumer demands. What is it that we will want in the future that guides him in the production processes that he starts today and undertakes over a period of time until the production process is finished, the commodity or good is ready for sale, and hopefully having anticipated what we will want so that we'd be willing and interested in buying it, and from his point of view, hopefully at a price that more than covers his expenses and earns him a profit on top of that. The entrepreneur searches out and is alert to profit opportunities in the form of resource prices that are, as a combined expense, less than the anticipated future price of a finished consumer good. That those means of production, land, labor, and capital, can assist in producing on the guidance of the supervising entrepreneur. The incentives are to creatively devise ways of offering to the consuming public new, better, and less expensive goods in the competitive rivalry of a market setting in which other entrepreneur producers are trying to do the same. The cumulative result in this competitive free market system is that more improved and lower priced goods fill the market over time. The scarce resources of the society are always tending to be employed in the most cost-efficient and productive ways in the process of bringing those goods to market. Businessmen, entrepreneurs have to apply their innovative, creative, and alert to profit opportunity talents in avenues that improve the quality and standard of life of the vast majority of the members of society. In the free market, there can be no cheating, no manipulating. Now, let me say, are there crooks? Are there con men? Are there disreputable people who try to take advantage of? Yes, that's always been the case since the beginning of time. It's not something new. The question is, can we set up a social institutional arrangement, rules of the game of society, if you will, that penalizes people for doing such things and directs them in their own individual self-interest to act in ways that, improving themselves, in fact makes others' circumstances better as well. And that is the nature of a free market economy. Now, the historical story, as I say here, of the evolution of modern capitalism is a long and multi-textured one. But if we mean by capitalism the system that has just been described, then capitalism only emerged on the historical scene during the last 300 years or so. Now, as I point out here, commerce, industry, trade, this is as old as recorded history. The ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, the ancient Chinese, the ancient civilizations of Africa and South America, there was always trade and commerce and industry. You could read, for example, the accounts of Marco Polo, the famous Venetian who in the 1300s, traveled to, 1200s, late 1200s, traveled to China from Italy. And if you read his accounts, he went there with his uncle and his father to enter into trade with merchants and businessmen in China, and then arduously eventually try to bring the goods that they bought there back to Europe to sell at a profit. And in his accounts, what we now call a book called The Adventures of Marco Polo, which he wrote when he returned to Italy after being in China for many years in the 1200s, is that you find that at every place he goes, there's shipping, there's trade, there's merchants, there's men of commerce. Okay? And therefore, but from the ancient times to the 1700s, as I say, all such enterprise and trade was controlled, regulated, taxed, or repressed by the political authorities and the power of those early times. Trade was monopolized by kings and princes for themselves or bestowed as privileges on a selected few who were loyal to and part of the royal orbit of power and repression. Governments commanded or prohibited various means and methods of production. Governments granted subsidies to some loyal producers and imposed confiscatory taxes on those out of favor with the king. Governments banned or limited imports of some goods and fostered or forbid the export of others. Laborers were compelled to work for the king and restricted in the trades, occupations, and professions that they could occupy. Governments fixed the wages and prices at which workers could be employed and goods could be sold in the market. Not one corner of economic life was free of the heavy hand of government micromanagement and control. That was the nature of commerce and industry for all of recorded history, up until relatively recently. The ideas of economic liberty, of freedom of enterprise, occupation, trade, these emerged out of the writings of a set of French and British authors in the 1700s. The middle decades of the 1800s saw the impact of these ideas on public policy, as many of these controls, restrictions, and regulations on domestic and foreign trade were either abolished or significantly reduced. As a result, the freeing of enterprise, the pursuit of occupation and trade from the heavy hand of government regulation and control, was implemented to the greatest degree in Great Britain and the United States, approaching really almost a truly free trade and free market society. Other countries in Europe then followed slowly but surely: Holland, France, Italy, Germany to some extent. But even so, governments never fully reduced its intervening hand from the marketplace, even in the freest of those countries, the United States and Britain. Indeed, before the 19th century ended and the early decades of the 20th century began, government economic and social policies again moved back in the direction of less freedom, more regulation, more control, more government command and prohibition and restriction, and giving of favors and privileges to some who were the beneficiaries of the largesse of what government could give them. Now, often the rationale for a restriction, a rationale for a restoration of the intervening interventions and the regulation of government in the marketplace, that it was to ameliorate supposed market failures. Market failures of various sorts, including monopolies that were supposedly in existence, unfair trading and employment practices by businessmen, and supposedly unjustifiable inequalities in the distribution of income and wealth. All of these became the rationales for government to return to its heavy-handed role, increasingly even in Britain and the United States, as the 20th century proceeded. Now, how could this be justified? The writers, the thinkers, the political philosophers, the political scientists, the economists of the late 18th and most of the 19th century said, government is the oppressor, government is the controller, government is the tyrant. We want to free people from these controls and regulations. So how could we justify now saying we need government back doing these things? The justification for a return to an increasingly intrusive governmental involvement in the marketplace in the 20th century was the idea that, unlike under absolute kings, seemingly answerable to no one but he, the king, who used his power for personal gain and power, modern democratic government was A, answerable to the people through the electoral process, and B, manned by an increasingly professional elite of experts who were knowledgeable and informed about how to effectively correct, through government intervention, the presumed market failures in society. And that both elected officials and those employed in the governmental bureaucracies were solely pursuing, quote, the public interest, unlike those in the competitive marketplace who were negatively viewed as only pursuing their own narrow, selfish profit motive. And these assumptions became the basis of what was called the public interest theory of government regulation and intervention in the modern market economy. However, in the 1950s and 60s, there developed a new group of economists and some political scientists. And they became known as what we now have called the public choice theorists. And what the public choice theorists argued is that the way that the case for government intervention and regulation was made assumes a dichotomy in human behavior. Now, what do I mean by a dichotomy in human behavior? Well, what do we assume about people in the marketplace? When the businessman greets you at the entrance of his store, and he smiles and is courteous and polite and says, "How can I help you? Is there anything you're interested in? Just ask if I can give you any assistance." We all know that he's doing this not because he's necessarily deceitful. He may actually be a nice, polite person. But we also realize that he's interested in us entering his store because he's pursuing his own self-interest. He would like us to buy the shoes, the shirt, the groceries, the new car in the showroom, precisely because he hopes to profit from it. So we assume that in the marketplace, people pursue their own self-interested goals and ends. But the public choice theorist said, but wait a second. If we accept that that is human behavior, people are self-interested, and that's the way people are, how is it that when we now talk about government, we now operate with a totally different mindset? We have self-interested, profit-oriented businessmen, and then those in government who are only concerned with the common good, who never think of what's in it for me. They only want to serve others. And isn't that what you hear from politicians, you know? Oh, I want to give back to the community. I want to hold political office only because I care for the society. I have no self-interest. I have no self-motivated goals. I'm only here to serve you. Right? Don't you hear that all the time? And why do you work in the bureaucracy of a government agency compared to some private enterprise business? Oh, I want to work in the government because I want to help improve the society. So, in other words, some guy woke up this morning and he had a job in the private sector and he was only focusing on what's in it for him. Then during that same day, he quits that job and he gets a job in government, and somehow there's this conversion in his very persona, and he only cares for you and has no interest in himself anymore. I mean, isn't that a little weird? So the public choice theorist said it's very simple. We should assume when we understand and are attempting to analyze the logic and behavior of people in the political arena the same way we assume that they're motivated in the private arena. Individuals are always motivated by self-interest. They're always looking for profitable opportunities, and they take advantage of mutual gains from trade with others to advance their own betterment. Now, if we understand this about government, we can then define what could be called crony capitalism. Crony capitalism may be understood as the use of political means to achieve economic ends through the use of government intervention, regulation, and redistribution of income to acquire that which the individual is not able or willing to obtain through the free and voluntary exchange and transactions of the open, competitive, free marketplace. Crony, in this case, means a special relationship and association between some in business or society in general with those in political power, able to provide or supply benefits to them at the expense of others who do not have the same associative relationships with those who can use government power in this way. Now, how can this crony capitalism work? You know, these government business relationships, what forms can they take? Well, government contracts for goods and services at taxpayers' expense. Oh, yes, but we're having a fair and closed bid. Give me a break. We all know that companies get contracts with government because it's not only what you know, but who you know. Right? We all know that's true. Government subsidies that cover all or part of a private enterprise's expenses of doing business in competition with others in the marketplace. Some guy cannot make a product at a private cost sufficient to be able to still earn a profit when he sells it. So what does he do? Oh, this product, it's good for the society. It's necessary for everyone. It's just too costly to produce. So I can keep supplying it for my fellow man. I need some tax money to cover my expenses. Right? He's just trying to stay in business when he can't make it cheaper to get you to pay a price that will cover his expenses. Trade barriers that limit or prohibit the sale of foreign-made goods or services within one's own country to shelter selected firms and industries from international competition. Yes, I can't weather the storm of the foreign competitor. Even though the consumers of my society would like to buy that foreign version of the product. It's better. It's less expensive. It's more convenient and useful. Oh no, that's unfair. And so he asks for the government to set up a trade barrier, a tax that raises the cost of bringing into the country to give him a protected market which he could not honestly earn in the open arena of free competition. Domestic regulations on business, industry, and commerce that limits the competition a domestic producer and seller would otherwise face from existing or new domestic rivals who might wish to compete against him for consumer business. Some domestic government regulation that places a barrier or a high wall in you starting your own business, entering a particular profession or occupation without the expensive or time-consuming regulatory process to get the permissions that only government can give, because if you try to carry out that profession, trade, or occupation without the license, you're subject to penalty or arrest. No, you cannot do that trade or profession or occupation unless government allows you. Well, that means that the existing firms and enterprises in that part of the economy are protected from what you might want to try to do as a competitor who thinks they could do better than the existing companies. Regulations restricting or prohibiting certain types or forms of investment, production, or resource use to achieve goals the advocates of such regulations cannot obtain through voluntary agreements and participation from others in society. A lot of people have, say, well, we need to do this for the good of society, we need to do that for the good of society, and they appeal to you. Well, will you help us? Will you give a contribution? And guess what? Sometimes you don't think it's a worthwhile goal. Or to be honest, you have your own needs for your money, the income that you've earned. And you have to set up your own priorities. And because they don't like the fact that you're not willing to help them because you either have limited means and have different priorities, or would rather maybe pursue this supposed socially desirable goal in a different way than they're proposing, they get so upset that they run to the government. Oh, the government should fund it. The government should regulate it to guarantee that the society is the way we think it should be, even though we can't persuade our fellow citizens to go along with us. And of course, taxation that transfers income and wealth from some members of the society to others, to the financial benefit of the recipients and the expense of those burdened with those taxes. Having other people pay for the things that you want, that you either choose not to earn enough to pay for yourself or can't get others to peacefully give you contributions for. Now, in this setting, we can understand how this all works out in the government in what has been called the iron triangle of the political process. And it was summarized by an economist named Milton Friedman, a famous free market economist. He died a few years ago. He won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1976. And he said here, the undoubted difficulty of slowing the growth of government, let alone reducing the size of a massive government, manifests itself in what has come to be called the iron triangle. At one corner are the direct beneficiaries of government intervention, the special interest groups. At a second, the legislative committees and their staffs, the politicians. And at the third, the bureaucracy administering the interventions and regulations. And it's the interaction of these three groups in the political process that results in government growing, becoming more restrictive, and more expensive. Let's look at each of them, okay? And let's ask ourselves what motivates, what is driving each of these three groups, politicians, bureaucrats, and special interest groups. So let's start with politicians. The motives, politicians, what do they want? They want to be elected and re-elected to political office. They like it. And this is in every country. They like to be the player, the mover in the political arena. Okay? Now, for what purpose? They want political power to implement and achieve various social and economic policies through their ability to use something that you and I don't have the ability to use as private citizens. Force, police power, to impose those policies on people in society, both those who support these policies and those who oppose them. And why do I say oppose them? Well, if you're in a democratic society, guess what? No politician ever gets 100% of the votes, which means some people didn't vote for him. But once in political office with that majority support, he then can use the power of government, taxing and regulating, to impose it on everyone, both those who voted for him, but also the ones who didn't. If I want to form a club or association with other private citizens, I can only get those to join who are interested in the purposes, the goals, the means that I think are valuable and useful and most likely to achieve the ends that we as a group have decided worth pursuing. I can't force other people to join my club. And therefore I can't force them to pay dues to cover the expenses that I say the club should be pursuing. But you see, government can do that, because they can tax and regulate everyone, even those who didn't vote to join that government policy club. They also have personal ambitions. The psychological pleasure of being powerful, controlling others, leaving their mark in history, making others conform to their demands. In the United States, it's always the case that after a person has been president for a while, right, whether he serves one 4-year term or a second and therefore a total of 8 years as president of the United States, always, shortly after, at least within the second or third year of his as president, he starts, you hear the newspapers talking about, well, his staff members are saying his legacy, his mark on history. Well, you see, any mark or legacy means his footprint on us. That's his legacy, his footprint on us. And some people just get the pleasure of being in power. There was an old comedy movie called The History of the World Part 1. It came out back in the 1980s, directed and starring a famous American comedian named Mel Brooks. And, there's a scene like caveman times and ancient Rome, and then, sort of little funny vignettes through history. And then he comes up to France before the French Revolution. And he himself is playing the King of France, the last King of France. And he walks around the grounds of the Palace of Versailles, right, the famous royal palace outside Paris. It's like the 1770s or something. And he goes around and he keeps abusing the staff members. And he always keeps looking into the camera after he does this and says, it's good to be king, it's good to be king. But you get to abuse people, right? You're the king, they can't stop you. So some people just like that. They want that power. Now, how do politicians get elected in democratic societies? By winning political election campaigns, which requires individuals and special interest groups to provide politicians with campaign contributions and enough votes on election day to be elected to political office. But how does the politician get you to give a campaign contribution and get you to go to the voting booth on election day and pull the lever or punch the stamp that gets him elected as opposed to the other guy? How do they get campaign contributions and votes? They offer their supporters other people's money. That is, after they are elected, they promise to implement various economic and social policies by taxing everyone in the society to pay for the programs, regulations, and income distributions that supporting individuals and special interest groups wish to have supplied to them. Tell you what I'm going to do. You elect me and I'm going to give you free housing. Well, but where does the money come from for the construction and the maintenance of the free housing? Somebody's got to pay for that. Tell you what I'm going to do. You elect me and I'm going to give you free medical care. Yes, national health insurance. And everybody will have it. It won't cost you a dime. Oh, the nurses and the doctors are working for free? Oh, the equipment in the hospital just miraculously falls from heaven? Nobody produced it in a factory at the expense of the resources and the labor time? No. People are going to have to be taxed so others can have something for free. I could go on and on, but you get my point there. What did I say yesterday? There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. Tanstoffel. If you ain't paying for it, the government is having somebody else pay for what you want. That's the essence of what politicians are about. They get your votes by promising you other people's money. Now, you may think, but wait a minute. I like those things, so I want other people's money. I'm just explaining that's the logic. What about the bureaucrats? Bureaucrats are those who direct and manage or work in the government departments, agencies, and bureaus. What do bureaucrats want? They want larger budgets and greater authority and power in their departments, bureaus, and agencies. Why? For what purpose? Larger budgets and greater authority for their departments, bureaus, and agencies mean more opportunities for promotions and pay increases. Just as the politician is self-motivated, he wants to be the big player in charge, the bureaucrat is like you and me. Why do you want a job? To earn an income. And in the private sector, don't you hope to do a good job so that your boss will think you're more valuable and give you a promotion? Of course, because a promotion and better salary means you then have more income to buy the things that you want. We all know this. Why should we assume that bureaucrats are any different? You get a government job, you want a promotion, because each promotion involves a salary increase. And the salary increase means you can then buy more things you want. It also means more power to control others in society. And there's no ignoring the psychology of the petty bureaucrat who increases his own sense of self-importance by controlling others. Oh, just go to some government bureau or department where you have to get a license, a permit, anything. It's the only game in town, right? If you want a driver's license, there's no other private store to go to like for a pair of shoes. You go to the government driving motor vehicles department, or you don't have a driver's license. You wait in line, and you don't want to get them angry or rude or upset with you because, they can play their little game. Oh, you didn't fill the form out right. You have to come back to my... Okay. Some people get off on having that mentality of the petty bureaucrat. You have to sort of, bow and, be deferential to them. It is, and furthermore, it is never in the self-interest of those working in or directing government bureau agencies and departments to ever solve the problem for which they have been established. That sounds weird, but it's no less true. If they solve the social problem for which their department, bureau, or agency was established, then there is no longer any reason or rationale for their continued existence. That is, if the social problem is solved, there is no reason for their budget and power. They would be out of a job. Now contrast this with the private sector. In the private sector, how do people make money? By solving your problems. I want a nice jacket that can keep me warm and is of good material that won't wear out. New and better coat. Great. I make money by solving your problem. A nicer jacket that wears better and wrinkles less. Okay? I want a comfy pair of shoes. That, all of us know that there's nothing more uncomfortable than a pair of shoes that don't fit right when you have to stand on your feet a long time during the day. Does everybody agree with that? Nothing is... Now, I'm a professor. I stand on my feet a lot of hours every day, right? I want comfy shoes, right? I want to be thinking about what I'm telling you, not that my feet are aching. People make money by solving my problems. More comfortable shoes. Lighter eyeglasses that are less likely to break if you drop them. Is that not important if you wear glasses? Of course. I could go on and on and on. So the more that they solve your problems in the little ways and in the big ways, the more the private sector enterpriser has the potential to earn money and to get your repeat business. Well, he solved my problem last time. I'm going to go back to him. He has a track record. So if I bought a pair of comfortable shoes once, and now I'm thinking of just adding another pair to my closet, or it's wearing out and I need a replacement, I'll go to that store again. You see? Repeat business, because they solve your problems. If the bureaucrat solves your problem, then what's the rationale for him to have a budget anymore? Now, I don't know what it's like in budget decisions here in the Bahamas, but I can assure you that in the United States, there are government bureaus and agencies, the head of which have to go each year to the U.S. Congress. And they have to make their budget proposals, which Congress has to vote on. Never once have I ever heard of the head of a government bureau in the United States going to the Congress saying, Mr. Senator, Mr. Congressman, you know that problem for which you set us up? It's solved. Mission accomplished. So in next year's budget, cut us by 50%. And the year after that, do away with all of us, including firing me. Mission accomplished. No, there's no self-interested motive in that. So instead, what is it? Thus, it is in their self-interest to always justify larger budgets and more power by arguing that the social problem is worse than was originally thought, or to argue that even if that social problem was solved, there are other social problems that can only be solved if they have the same or larger budgets and power to handle it. It is in their self-interest to always argue for more power and control over other people's lives. Let me give you an example of this. You know, there was this terrible event in the United States back in 2001, right? The terrorist attack, right, 9/11 as they call it. Those terrorists seized those planes and they crashed into the 2 trade towers in New York, and another plane crashed into the Pentagon, right, the military administrative headquarters in Washington, outside of Washington, D.C., and they set up this department in the federal government, a presidential cabinet level department, the Department of Homeland Security. And for what purpose? To see that there's no more terrorist attacks on the American homeland. I can guarantee you that whether objectively terrorism ever ends or not, that department will never go away. Why? If there is no terrorist attacks of that magnitude or type in the United States, again, every year the head of the Department of Homeland Security is going to go before the congressional budget committees, and they're going to say, you see, you have to keep us in place because, look, we've succeeded. There's been no terrorist attacks, but they're sneaky out there. We need more money, more authority to make sure that we have a track record that nothing will happen. Now, let's suppose that tragically another terrorist attack like that were to occur. Then they'd go to Congress, and what would they say? You see, you didn't give us enough money and power. We need more money and more power because you didn't give enough last time. That's why we had another attack. You see, no matter what happens, more money and more power. You can't do that in the private sector because, you see, there's an objective test. Are the shoes comfortable or not? If they're not, you ain't getting my business ever again. How do you know whether they're doing their job in the Department of Homeland Security or any other government department? You don't. Because it doesn't have the market test of buying and selling and profit and loss. But they'll keep rationalizing more money and bigger budgets. And let me say one thing on this thing. You know, because it's a big deal in the United States, this whole issue of, government surveillance and spying on people. Okay, who do you think applies for that kind of a job? Okay, this economist that I've mentioned before, Friedrich Hayek, during World War II, he wrote a book called The Road to Serfdom, and it's about the dangers of bigger and growing government. And he has a chapter in there called Why the Worst Get on Top. And what did he mean by that? Well, he means that the people who go into government and stay in government are the ones who are going to have the fewest scruples about doing whatever is necessary to accomplish what they've been told as a bureaucrat that they have to do. So what does it mean in this context? What kind of personality do you think gets a job in the Department of Homeland Security or the National Security Agency, right? NSA, they're the ones who all the spying and listening, right? You've read about that. What kind of guy applies for this job? The kind of guy that at the end of a day, after snooping and spying on private people, goes home and says, oh, I feel so guilty. I really didn't want to do it, but it's a dirty job and somebody has to do it. Or is it more likely to be a person who likes to do that? And he goes home and says, boy, I snooped today. How can I figure out a way to snoop better tomorrow? To look into somebody's private emails, to be watching their keystrokes on the computer. So it attracts the people who like doing these things. Right? Do you ever go, gee, I want to apply to this job because it's the kind of work I really hate? I mean, who does this intentionally or consciously, right? Nobody. And that's the dilemma. And finally, there's special interest groups. Special interest groups are groups of individuals in society who try to get government to implement regulations and controls over markets and market activities, and or to impose taxes to redistribute income and wealth from some individuals or groups in society to others. Now, what purpose? To obtain larger revenues or higher incomes than they are able to obtain through peaceful and voluntary market activities or through voluntary contributions from others in society. They want to use the power of government coercive force to obtain from others what they cannot obtain through peaceful and voluntary exchange and persuasion. They want politicians and bureaucrats to give them other people's money. Okay. Now, I was on a radio show Wednesday after I arrived, and I was asked this question, which I'm sure is very controversial, and I don't mean to get embedded in the domestic some of the social issues of the Bahamas. So, but I was there, so it's a perfect example of this. I would say, the people of the Bahamas as a whole want to preserve their culture, and that includes people being able to live out on the outlying islands. But it's very expensive to provide electricity and other supplies. So the government has to see that it's distributed evenly to everybody. Really? Why? If I decide that I don't want to live in a city, and I want to live out in the forest, right on a mountaintop, well, how do I get water there? How do I get electricity there? I would have to pay for some company to build the sewer system to get water up there, to lay the power line for me to have power. If I want to incur the expense of living in the middle of nowhere, where these infrastructure facilities are not easily or readily made available, then it's logical I pay the cost for it. If you want to live on a mountaintop, it's going to be more costly to build the house and maintain it than if you're down in a valley near roads and transportation facilities. Why should I expect others to pay for my house on the mountaintop? It's not we, it's you wanting other people's money. Somebody, the analogy of that, somebody wants to live on one of these outlying islands, that's their choice. That's their choice. They either do without, or they incur the cost of seeing that they and the other people who may live on that outlying island pool the money together to supply it themselves, rather than expect you sitting in Nassau to cover part of their expenses and therefore leave you with less money in your pocket to do things that are important to you. It's not we, it's them versus us. Now, how can these gaining of other people's money be acquired? They can be done through market regulations, price controls, production restrictions that limit domestic and foreign rivals from competing against the special interest groups with the ear of the politicians, or imposing taxes that are used to transfer wealth and income from one group of people in the society to another. And special interest groups have a strong incentive to offer campaign contributions and votes to politicians to obtain these political favors and privileges. As long as the cost is less of using politics than earning it through the marketplace, some businessmen will have motives to run to government to get the favors and privileges at the taxpayer and consumer expense, for as long as government has the power to give those favors and privileges to some at other people's expense and cost. Now, the dilemma, how does this arise and why does it arise? Now, the dilemma arises from that very thing that makes society as productive as it is, the division of labor. By people not living in self-sufficient production, having to do everything themselves with their own limited resources, labor, and mental skills, we can enjoy a far better quality and standard of living by dividing our labor, specializing what we're best at, and trading our specializations with each other to gain from what others can do that we ourselves cannot, or as well. Division of labor has given us the standards of living we take for granted. But then you see there's a problem. Once you have specialization and division of labor, you are the consumer of many things and you're the producer of one or a handful of things. If there's wide and open competition, an effective improvement of products and falling expenses so the goods can be sold for less, we all benefit as consumers. And therefore, as consumers, we want better products at lower costs through wide and open competition, so everyone has to run around improving what they're doing to get our business. So as consumers, we want competition. But you see, as producers, we don't. Because you're the producer of one thing. You don't want a bunch of competitors coming to your part of the market and competing away the customers. Then you have less income to then spend on the things that you want. This creates a bias of being more concerned with your producer interest as the producer of one than a consumer of the buyer of much and many. And it's that bias that once the political system allows you to lobby and petition to get favors in your producer role at the expense of everyone else as a taxpayer and consumer that causes the kind of problems that we see in our society. Furthermore, this brings about what economists, these public choice theorists, have called the concentration of benefits and the diffusion of burdens, which creates the dynamic of why government keeps growing and people get these favors and privileges and special interest programs, even when many in the rest of the society say it's too costly, it's corrupt, it's inefficient. Why does it keep growing like this? Government interventions, either in the form of transfer or a tariff against imported good or a regulation, all serve to improve the economic position of some selected special interest group for whom the benefit from the intervention is concentrated on them. On the other hand, the cost or burden of the intervention is diffused, spread out over all the other consumers and taxpayers of the society. How so? Well, I do an example here. Suppose that there's a tariff, a tax on the importing of a good. Okay? Suppose a tariff is imposed on an imported product with the result that consumers now pay 50 cents more per unit purchased. And suppose that the protected domestic producer now, because each of us has to pay 50 cents more since the tax has been imposed to keep out the less expensive foreign good, that from 50 cents more on the product from you and you and you and me, the seller, the domestic seller, now sells 100,000 items at 50 cents higher than higher per unit price. Now, the domestic producer will now earn an extra $50,000 as a result of this protectionist tariff keeping out the less expensive foreign good. 50 cents times 100,000 units. Consumers as a whole will be paying this $50,000, where $50,000 is coming from our purchases of this good at 50 cents more per item than we had before. But the problem is, how much of it imposed upon us? Just 50 cents. Now, your 50 cents, and your 50 cents, and your 50 cents, you add up all the 50 cents, there's that domestic producer protected from domestic foreign competitions, extra $50,000. Who, therefore, has the greater incentive to be for or against the protection against the foreign competition? Well, the domestic producer will have a greater incentive to lobby to have the tariff imposed or to lobby to stop it from being eliminated compared to the individual consumers. The bias or skewed influence is for the special interest group to work hard to obtain or retain the benefit of such an intervention compared to the individual consumer, whose cost of trying to prevent or repeal the intervention will often be greater than the benefit of that slightly higher per unit price on the good in question. Let's suppose that I say, I'm going to arrange an anti-special interest lobbying group. We're going to fight this special interest group, and we're going to eliminate this special little tariff that keeps out less expensive foreign goods. And if we do this, you're going to save 50 cents a year on your purchases. But I need for you to give me a $5 contribution for us to work against this. How many are going to give, as a private individual, one person, give $5 to save 50 cents? See, a lot of us won't see the motive for it. But the guy who's getting the 50 cents is from all of us that adds up to the 50,000 in his pocket. Boy, he has the motive to support this. You see the bias, the skewedness in this as to who has the bigger influence and motive to be for or against something. This is the tragic dynamic. And in fact, this was explained long ago by a famous Italian economist named Vilfredo Pareto. Very, very famous economist. He was also a sociologist, a well-known sociologist. He had a tragic life. He inherited a fortune from an uncle. He moved to a villa in Switzerland along Lake Geneva, and he lived with his wife and a menagerie of Siamese cats. And then tragedy struck. His wife ran off with the gardener, and he was left with the huge collection of Siamese cats, all alone. And he'd inherited a fortune, and she runs over the gardener. That must have been some gardener. That's all I can say. What a guy. Anyway, love conquers all, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, it's a true story. This is what, back in 1896, he explained this. Let us suppose that in a country of 30 million inhabitants, it is proposed under some pretext or other to get each citizen to pay one more franc a year, right? An extra one French franc tax, and distributed the total amongst 30 people, a special interest group of 30 people in the society. Every one of the donors will give up 1 franc a year. Every one of the beneficiaries will receive 1 million francs a year, right? 30 million people in the society. Each of the 30 million is going to pay a 1 franc more tax a year, and therefore 30 million times 1 franc is 30 million francs, and the 30 million francs are divided among 30 people in a special interest group. Well, obviously each one gets 1 million francs. The two groups will differ very greatly in their response to the situation. Those who hope to gain 1 million a year will know no rest day or night. They will win newspapers over to their interest by financial inducements, drum up support from all quarters. A discreet hand will warm the palm of needy legislators, even of ministers. Ooh, I'm shocked. On the other hand, the despoiled are much less active. A great deal of money is needed to launch an electoral campaign. Now there are insuperable difficulties militating against each citizen to contribute a few centimes, a few pennies. One has to ask a few people to make substantial contributions, but then for each people there is the likelihood that their individual contribution to the campaign against the spoliation, the plunder, will exceed the total amount they stand to lose by the measure in question. Those who hope to gain 1 million apiece will have agents everywhere, in contrast to the individual who is threatened with losing a mere franc a year. Even if he is aware of what is afoot, will not for so small a thing forego a picnic in the country, or fall out with useful or congenial friends, or get on the wrong side of the mayor. In these circumstances, the outcome is not in doubt. The spoilators, the plunderers, the manipulators will win hands down. And that's basically the part of the dynamic, just from the economist logic of motives, incentives, costs, benefits, of why government grows and special interest groups get more and more at the general public's expense. An accompanying idea of what economists call rent-seeking. I'll go through this a little bit quickly. Rent-seeking is a name given to the pursuit of profits through the political process. It has been suggested that a better name for the concept might be political profit-seeking in comparison to market profit-seeking. Rent means a profit greater than the opportunity cost of doing something else. In other words, let us suppose that someone offered you a job, and they offered you, let's say, $500 a week. Why would you take this job if you already have one and someone is paying you already $500? Well, you might like the job more, but if it's just like the money in question, why change jobs if this guy's offering you the same amount that this other guy is already paying you, right? There's the inconvenience, you have to move, maybe it's a further ride to work. But if you just think of the money, why bother if this guy is only willing to offer you the same amount that the current employer is paying you? He can only entice or induce you away if he says, oh, you're earning $500 a month now, I'll pay you $550 a month. Well, all other things held the same, an extra $50, why pass it up? The extra $50 is the rent. The extra income or amount above your opportunity cost. That is, the other job you could have instead, the other source of income that you could have. Rent-seeking, especially in public choice theory, has come to be the term referring to the attempt to gain a greater net profit through political intervention by the government than could be earned through voluntary exchange on an open competitive market. Think of our domestic producer in the example just a moment ago, who has a hard time matching or meeting the foreign competitor who's trying to get your business. But if he can get the government to impose that import tax so it's more expensive for the foreign supplier to sell it here, then he can bump up his price because he doesn't have to be worried about the foreign seller getting your business instead of him, and he has an extra amount over what he could earn if he had to match the open competition, including the foreign competitor. That's the extra profit he makes by manipulating the political system, not by playing fair and square to get your money honestly by making the better or less expensive product. And I'll just say is that this results in a strange thing, which I don't have the time to go through, is that let's suppose there's 3 competitors, and the government announces that they're going to turn this market, where these three competitors are into a monopoly. That is, one person is going to be given a government license to be the single remaining producer, which of course means the government monopoly privilege will drive the other two out of the market. Now, what's going to be the motive of these three producers? To lobby and compete against each other, not in the marketplace, but in the political arena, to be the lucky one who gets the government-given monopoly position at the expense of the two others who can't operate anymore. And they're going to have a motive and incentive to spend money reflecting the extra monopoly profit they'd earn if the competition is legally driven from the market, as well as the revenue they would lose if they can't compete in that market anymore and have to find something else to do. So they're going to have a motive to spend a lot of money in the political process to become the lucky one with the government favor, to be the single monopolist, as opposed to devoting their time, energies, and resources to doing what? Beating each other in the marketplace by making better and less expensive goods to make your life easier and more comfortable. So by government having these privileges and powers to give privilege, they create perverse incentives to spend resources not on making stuff for us, but to compete against each other in politics to get the lucky brass ring of the favor at the expense of the other competitors. That's wasteful. Now, the one other element of this that the economists emphasize is what they call rational ignorance. Now you think of me, what does it mean? Why would I, what makes it rational to be ignorant? Isn't it rational to be informed and knowledgeable? The answer is not always. How many of you ever have done a term paper or a group project for a class? This is not a trick question, okay? Most of you have, right? Now, you had to do reading and research to write the term paper, right? You had to read some articles, some books, go through some documents, right? That's what you do in writing a term paper or a research report. Now, how many of you consciously read each and everything that you hypothetically could have read before you wrote the report? You didn't. You stopped. Even you might have known that there were certain things you could have kept reading, but you didn't. Why? Because time was running out. Or the more time you devote to working on this class's research report or term paper, guess what? You have less time to study for another exam, another class. You have to trade off the time. So even though you know that there are things that more you could learn about a subject, you choose to not, because the cost of doing so would be greater than the benefit. Other things that your time could be doing instead that you consider more valuable. You see the logic of that? So we all choose to be rationally ignorant. Economics is my field. I love economics. I know I'm a wild and crazy guy, go figure. And I love the history of economic ideas. So it's not only I've read like today's economics, I read a lot of stuff like the history of how economics developed. Old dead people. I'm a big fan of old dead people. They left their ideas in the books, and I like to read their old dead books. But anyway, that's just me again. Okay? Do I know everything in economics? No. Could I know more? Yes. Why have I chosen not to become better read, more informed about my own specialized subject that I like? Because there are other constraints on my time. And you know what the part of that is? My wife tells me things I have to do. You better get it done, but I want to read another book. Tomorrow you can read the book. So and you see, if I don't do that, the cost will be greater than the benefit, because, boy, I'll be in the doghouse with my wife. So, you know, those are the cost-benefit comparisons you make, right? But you see what I'm saying. Now, ask yourself this. If you become a well-informed and knowledgeable voting citizen, how much of an impact will you personally have on the outcome of the election? Very little. Let me give an example. In November 2012, Barack Obama was reelected as President of the United States. And it's estimated that 118 million eligible voters cast their ballot, either for or against him. Okay? That means that any one voter in the United States had a weight, a power, an influence on the outcome of 118 millionth of an influence on the vote. So whether you as a person, one person, vote or not, Were you going to influence the outcome of that election in the United States? No. You're like this little teeny drop in the voting bucket. Now, since your personal influence on the outcome is almost always virtually zero, right? If you vote or not, you're not going to influence the outcome. How much of a motive do you have to become the well-informed and knowledgeable citizen voter to know what the hell you're voting on? None. You have more valuable things to spend time with your family, your friends, to do some extra work, to just hang out at home and watch a movie that you'd enjoy, that you'd get pleasure from, as opposed to reading newspapers, the news magazines, watching the news on television. It's not worth it, given the various constraints on your own time and whether you think you're going to get any impact from spending your time that way. Now, are there people who do that? There are news junkies, there's political junkies. They're always talking about politics. They're always talking about this, that, and the other. They're always, just glued to the TV news. Some people just like it. It's like a hobby, right? Don't people like hobbies? They become obsessive. Like in the United States, you have this weird game, cricket. I don't even know what that means. But in the United States, we have baseball. And there are people in the United States who are obsessed with baseball. They know every player who's ever played on any team in baseball going back to the beginning of 1900, with how many hits they had with the bat, how many home runs, how many. They know. Who cares, right? It's just your hobby. You like it. It's like stamp collecting. Some people are, but for most people, politics is not their, is not their hobby or their liking. It's one other thing that is a pull on their time and their attention. And if you don't think that there's much outcome or bang for the buck, you're not going to spend much time on it. So you are rationally ignorant. But who is not rationally ignorant? Those special interest groups that if they get a special subsidy, a special anti-competitive regulation, a government contract, that's going to be big concentrated bucks towards them, right? Like those 30 people who each get $1 million by taxing 30 million citizens $1 apiece, right? The example I did. They have a big incentive. What's this politician stand for? How open is he going to be to doing me a favor if he gets elected with my help? And that's the dilemma we face in the modern democratic society, in which government has the power and the latitude and the discretion to hand out the favors to the people who are most motivated about applying and trying to get the favors from the hand giving them out. It becomes worthwhile giving a campaign contribution, the vote on election day, because the gains are greater than the costs at other people's expense. That is the dilemma of modern democratic society. That is the nature of the beast. As long as government has the power to hand out goodies, people are going to be there to get their hand in the cookie jar. Until we take away the power of government to have a cookie jar, there's going to be people hovering around the cookie jar. And that's the dilemma we have in modern democratic society today. Thank you very much. All righty. Any questions or comments real quickly before we take a break? Yes.
Well, seeing that we have such a small society here in the Bahamas,
All right.
and the typical crony capitalism
Right.
is said to allegedly exist.
Oh, you mean that occurs here too?
Allegedly.
I'm shocked. I thought you had a perfect society here.
How do we counter it? How do we counter it when there are so many persons who are either related to politics
Right.
or already on the...
Well, at one level, the system has its natural end. It's called the financial bankruptcy of the government. You're having a few financial difficulties here in your country. Excuse me? And what happens then when you have enough taxes, and I'll be talking a little bit about taxes, I think it's next. What happens when you impose so many taxes that you destroy incentives and the financial ability of both your domestic producers as well as any foreign investors who would have come in to have the ability to generate the wealth that the government is taxing? In other words, there's a phrase I'm sure you've all heard too, you kill the goose that lays the golden egg, right? Finally it breaks. I mean, look at Greece right now, right, in Europe. It not only borrowed more than the members of the society could generate with wealth to pay back, they cooked the books, right? They lied to the International Monetary Fund, to their fellow European Union country members. I mean, they lied. And they've had to go with a cup and out, please, bail us out, please, because they got over their heads. You know, the United States is facing these financial difficulties. We'll talk about that too when we talk about deficits a little bit. See, Greece has had the European Union and the International Monetary Fund, you know, to dole out some money to save them from total disaster. When a country like the U.S., if it finds out in that situation, who bails the U.S. out? Oh, I forgot. Jupiter, Mars, Neptune, Venus, what, other planets, right? Nobody's going to, oh, the Bahamas will bail out the United States. You're such nice people. Thank you. I'm looking forward to it. I mean, this is the dilemma. Finally, at the end of the day, you go bankrupt. The other factor, the only way it is that the system finally becomes so corruptly cynical that people begin asking the question, is this the way we want to live? And then they have to ask themselves, even if there are short-run costs to myself, do we need to change the rules of the game for ourselves and the next generation of our own children so they have a more prosperous, more innovative, and government less expensive society? And sometimes people get their lives together. Is it difficult to overcome a drug addiction or an alcoholic addiction? Duh, yeah. And some people tragically cannot get over it. But are there people who overcome their alcohol or drug addiction even though there's the short-run physiological pain and difficulty of doing so? Yeah. So enough people in society have to say, this is sort of like government spending and government corruption is like a drug on our society. It seems to give a euphoric high to a lot of people, but it's hurting everybody, including me, that's sometimes receiving the goodie. And we have to sort of decide to get new rules of the game. Okay, any other questions or comments? All right, so let's, another one, one more, okay. We got a, quickie.
What influence, in your opinion, what influences the voter decision the most when selecting a congressman or senator or president for that matter? Is it the economic benefit? Is it their political affiliation? Is it the social improvement? Is it their personal gain or is it the community gain on a whole?
Obviously, that's difficult to generalize. Everybody is different, right? Like if I were to ask you, just as a private person, what motivates you? There are different things motivating you, goals, purposes, values you have. If I asked this young lady here, she would give different answers, right? Different combinations of this. Some politicians run for office because they just want power. Some politicians, like I said, they want to leave their mark in history, the legacy, right? The legacy. Others just, are corrupt. Why did Bill Clinton want to be president in the United States in the 1990s? Well, he obviously liked politics. If I can say it, if you'll excuse me, he also seemed to like to have a large supply of willing female interns as well. It was big in the United States at that time. He was a very corrupt person. He got into trouble for doing something that he said he hadn't done, which he really did, with a young lady who was an intern at the White House. But anyway, people do this for different reasons. But the political arena enables you to have access to something that you and I as private citizens don't have. The power of government to tax regulate. That is to use force to get our way, which you and I can't do without getting into trouble with the law. Okay, let's take a quick break. We return at 10:30? Okay, thank you.